What's going on, everybody? I'm back to share my final thoughts on Alone in the Dark. I'm a big fan of detective noir, like psychological horror stories, so Alone in the Dark was right up my alley. I've beat the game twice with both protagonists and want to offer up my opinion on Pieces Interactive's reimagining of 1992's Alone in the Dark, a survival horror classic. Disclaimer, all of the footage that I'm going to show in this video is all from the first 2 hours of the game with both protagonists. So yeah, there won't be any like late game spoilers or anything like that. In terms of the story, Emily Hartwood receives a concerning letter from her uncle Jeremy Hartwood stating that the people he lives with might be conspiring in a cult. Emily hires a private investigator, Edward Carnby, to accompany her in this wellness check. However, they quickly learn that Jeremy has been missing for a while. The investigation that ensues branches out in psychologically proprietary ways, depending on who you choose to play as, Emily Hartwood or Edward Carnby. The two stories are similar in that you go to the same places, but you know, your perspective on things and the experience you have with people or dealing with trauma in a way it differs depending on who you're playing as. And as I was playing, the first time through, I was kind of like, if you've seen my previous video, I was thinking like, oh man, I really wonder how far they're going to take some of this stuff. And while I would say that the subject matter can get on the darker side of things, personally, I felt like it never went far enough, or they didn't really allow those moments to breathe. Some of the, the resolution towards the end of the game kind of felt like it just didn't have like the weight that I was hoping that it would. And unfortunately, that kind of makes the story suffer a little bit. Everything makes sense, and I can see the through line of where they're going with things, but some of the bigger moments that I think were meant to have like a more emotional impact on the player just kind of fell flat for me personally. There are a handful of different endings, which personally I felt like kind of cheapened the experience a little bit, because by the time I started messing around with them, some of them felt, I don't want to say nonsensical, but just like that, like I didn't understand how or how we arrived at this point. So if you're coming into this for like really good environmental storytelling, a really interesting premise and setting, and the kind of the bits of information that you uncover as you play, that stuff was really interesting. But in terms of the narrative and for the characters themselves, or like their personal stories, I felt like that is where this game kind of lacked. Definitely, the story, as you're making like the character of Derceto in this house, and all the people that live there, and all the bits of information that you get about them, and how the characters get fleshed out, all that is really good and compelling. Basically, the overarching story of like what is happening right now with everybody, that stuff, everything that it felt like it was setting up, it didn't really stick the landing. There's really tons to unpack, and if you're somebody that likes to kind of sift through audio logs and stuff like that, you'll enjoy this, because that was kind of the highlight for the story in my eyes after playing twice. In terms of gameplay, there are two sides of Alone in the Dark. There's the puzzle solving, and then there's the combat. The puzzles aren't too deep, but they do require focus and some like light research, and for you to like kind of pilfer through things and try to sort things out. It's not always going to be as clear as day. I literally kept a notebook that I wrote, like if I found a code for something that I needed to go back and unlock, I wrote it down, or if I needed to like draw up a symbol or something so that I would remember it and not have to keep popping back into the menus, I did that kind of stuff. And that was something that I really enjoyed about this game. It actually kind of inspired me to explore more games like that, because I didn't expect to enjoy that. Typically puzzles are like my kryptonite. They're not my favorite thing, but I think I'm starting to acquire a taste for them, which is pretty cool. And Alone in the Dark kind of did that, or helped me with that. Now, the combat is where Alone in the Dark truly suffers. The way I would say it is that like gunplay is janky, where it doesn't feel intuitive. like what I know I can pull off in other games, I just can't do in this game. And so, not that I'm like an MLG kind of like, is MLG even still a thing? I don't know, but not that I'm like the best, but like in terms of like the third person over the shoulder kind of shooter thing, like I know I can do way cooler stuff in like The Last of Us, and it feels better than it does in this. And I don't mean to compare the two, but it just kind of like it just feels janky. And in my previous video, my like first impressions, I didn't know if that was like a stylistic choice based on the characters or whatever. I think I was affording this game too much of the benefit of the doubt, which I'm willing to do until I finish the game. But yeah, that kind of it stayed janky even on both playthroughs, and with more time getting used to it, it still kind of felt funny. And the melee combat is completely impactless. Like, it feels very unpolished, and there's like no weight or impact to anything that you're doing in terms of like, you'll pick up like a bat or a axe and you can swing it at enemies, but it almost has that, it's not Elder Scrolls like floaty, just kind of like swishing it around, but it feels cheap. It made the combat not as fun. There's hardly anything I would really call stealth gameplay in this, but technically you can crouch and sneak and get around enemies. And there are some segments in the game that really, I used that and completely avoided some enemy encounters, but, calling it stealth is maybe a bridge too far for me. It's more like sneaking. You're just kind of sneaking around. The one thing I will say about that, though, it's like, in terms of the combat, when you are sneaking around, it's not like the enemies are complete idiots. Once they spot you, they are making a beeline towards you and they start to swarm you, which happened to me a couple of times. I don't know if that happens to just come down to the ability to maneuver the character in the environment, but the times that I felt swarmed were some of the more intense moments of the gameplay, and it raising my heart level at all, or my heartbeat at all, kind of made the game feel a little bit more intense and more enjoyable, but still having to fight against the janky controls and the floaty kind of melee combat and stuff like that. You can kind of like pick up bottles and throw them, and when they burst, you can shoot them and it'll light them on fire, and stuff like that's cool. But ultimately, if there's one glaring weak point in this game, it's combat, which, it's got to be there. But, I think that this game does other things much better, and it's a shame that the amount of polish that went towards other things didn't also extend to the game, like the gunplay and gameplay or the combat, I should say. The bosses were hardly a problem. It's pretty clear what you need to do to get through them, and there aren't that many of them. Even like the final like boss fight kind of felt lackluster. The only thing that made it difficult was on my second playthrough. I played to get the trophy where you don't use the health potion the entire time, and there's no, or like, you don't press the button to give yourself health, and at no point in the story do they ever just like top off your health. So by the end of the game, I had pretty low health and was really fighting this boss and was getting one hit constantly, and like that self-imposed challenge made it more fun. But once you start using your health potions, it gets so trivial, it's kind of ridiculous. And technically there are ways where you can do certain endings that kind of bypass certain things that would make that playthrough a lot easier. But yeah, I kind of brute forced my way through it. There are these sections with a character called the Dark Man. He's in the kind of like the key art for the game. Those sections are really unnerving because you're not supposed to engage with combat. You're more supposed to run from him. And actually, if you attempt to shoot at him, something happens. I don't want to spoil it, but it's like, okay, clearly I've got to run from this guy. And those are kind of like, that was when my heart rate was the highest. I was like, oh my God, come on, go, 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 go. That stuff was fun. But there's just really not enough of those moments where I kind of wish the Dark Man was introduced in sections like that more often, because it felt like we kind of got like a taste of it, but there was just really no payoff with that. And ultimately, in terms of the gameplay, calling this game a survival horror game feels inaccurate. like it's almost like a misnomer. To me, it's more of like a psychological horror puzzle adventure game with some light combat. You know, I always had ammo. I always had health on tap. There was no like inventory management. There wasn't any like real stealth or anything that I felt like was adding to what I think of when I think of survival horror. And so, if you're coming into it hoping for a survival horror experience, you might be a little let down by this game. You know, moving on from the gameplay, the audio and visuals in this game it's weird to think of those as kind of being like the crowning achievements of this game. But, you know, if developers sometimes work on projects like this to, build a portfolio, the people that did the visuals and the audio in this game, they're going to probably move on to bigger and better things, because they really shined with their work in this game. It's where Alone in the Dark is the most polished. Pieces Interactive's use of sound really made for some unsettling moments, particularly if you play with headphones. I found that to be like really immersive and unsettling. Not like totally unsettling, but just kind of like being on edge and kind of being like, oh man, there's like things happening around me. Like I'm walking across the boardwalk and I can tell there's something swimming in the water underneath of me, and I don't know if that's about to jump out and scare me, or I don't know if it's just there to look at what this hand's doing, not what's happening over here. There was some really cool stuff like that happening. You know, people talking on the other side of walls that you can kind of hear what they're saying and get like context clues about what might happen, or is there really a conspiracy happening and stuff like that. Like that stuff was really cool, and like the overall like kind of like moody atmosphere with like the visual presentation and the audio really came together in a way that I felt was punching above this game's weight quite a bit. While there is some texture pop in and like frame chugging particularly when you like transition to a cutscene or come out of a cutscene, there'd be some like performance dips, but overall it's pretty fantastic when it counts, which is in the moments when you're kind of like walking through a corridor and, you know, there's like a fog on the floor, and, you know, that part is really cool. And the soundtrack is perfect for the setting. I'm a huge Twin Peaks fan, and the kind of like detective, like smooth jazz that's a little creepy, it was giving some like Angelo Badalamenti vibes that were right up my alley. So like this is something that like I would absolutely put on to write and just sip coffee and just kind of plan out a video or do something like that. Like the soundtrack is really good. But, you know, really in conclusion, ultimately, I think that because I enjoy the setting and vibe and type of story that Alone in the Dark is, I may be affording it grace that most wouldn't. And just in the name of full transparency, I want to communicate that. But keep in mind, I am going to try to be as objective as possible when giving my final take on it. You know, the story is fine, and like I said, it technically makes sense. You can see the through line for it, but it just didn't resolve in a way that I found to be profound or impactful in any way. Other than some memorable characters and exploring some intriguing concepts in the audio diaries and kind of what is set up in the beginning of the game, I don't think it went far enough in what the narrative really sets out to do. The poor combat pokes a hole in a fun puzzle game, a fun puzzle adventure game, that it really is paced really well for what it is. You know, I think the first playthrough came in maybe just around, I got like a played for more than 8 hours trophy, so it probably ended up coming in around like 9.5 hours, something like that. But then like on the second playthrough, I think I beat that one in like 6, and there's a trophy for beating the game in 3 hours, which depending on how creative you get and how you get through things and like skipping cutscenes and stuff like that, it's totally achievable. I'm not going to go for that, but ultimately I felt like these set pieces in the game, like nothing overstayed its welcome. And a lot of the puzzles kind of like once you resolve it, it's kind of like, okay, now we're moving on to the next set piece. And so that was cool. It wasn't like you solve a puzzle that took you 15-20 minutes and then there was another section of that puzzle that you then had to go solve, which I enjoyed quite a bit. Keeping a notebook during the game to help solve puzzles and, just like jot down clues for myself and try to like stay organized. That was really fun. And that's that kind of like gameplay that evolves outside of the game. That, I think that is why this game's puzzle adventure stuff really stand out. And it's just a shame that the combat is so bad, because it really does bring down, it's something that, the gameplay being so bad is dead weight that the puzzle adventure game qualities just can't carry, ultimately. Not enough anyway. The sound design and soundtrack are really great. But I would really say you'd have to hear it for yourself, because I'm not going to put it in this YouTube video because I don't want to get like flagged or demonetized or whatever. Definitely play with headphones for that full immersion. It's worth it. Trust me. While not being perfect, the visual presentation is really polished and in some moments I would say really great. But ultimately, if I had to score Alone in the Dark, I would give it a 3 out of 5 or a 6 out of 10 if you prefer a 10-point scale. And, I think I feel that way because it's kind of what I expected going into this game. It being, one, published by THQ Nordic, I kind of imagine a game with a smaller budget and, being developed by Pieces Interactive, a studio I've not heard of before. I was kind of going into this expecting kind of like a lower budget, in terms of scope of what they're trying to set out to do. I was kind of going in expecting that. So, I think if you're going in hoping for, something that would compete with like a Resident Evil remake or like Resident Evil 2 remake or something like that, you might feel a little disappointed. But if you go into it expecting, kind of like something that feels more akin to like a random release on the Xbox 360, just with like really high fidelity and questionable gameplay, you might be pretty excited, depending on how you feel about adventure puzzle games and stuff like that. Really, the pacing and the puzzles and like the desire to try to solve the puzzles in a way that, because there were some times like I was cheesing locks and just putting in random codes until it worked, and it was working surprisingly well. The second time I went back and played through, I really wanted to hunt around for those clues and find them, and after I had an understanding of the game, by the time I got to the second playthrough, I really was able to figure out where everything was coming from, and that was just a lot of fun. That crowning moment for this game is the puzzle solving and the adventure gameplay stuff. However, Alone in the Dark really has inspired me to shed some light on some of the survival horror blind spots in my backlog. I kind of want to go back and finally dive into Resident Evil. I played 4 as a kid and 5 when I was in high school, but I've never really gone back. It's funny because I own Resident Evil, the PS4 kind of like not remake, but like remaster, and I have Resident Evil 2 on PS5, and I think it's about time I go back to that. Even The Evil Within I want to check out, just because I bought that a while ago when it was on sale and just never dived into it, so I'm going to do that. So if you're interested in my take on those things, definitely subscribe to the channel for videos on those, kind of more retrospective kind of look backs. And if you're into videos like this about newer releases, definitely subscribe, like, all that stuff. But if you would like to check out the podcast that I host, it's a weekly gaming conversation. It's called Save Scummers. You can find that on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and maybe Google Podcasts while it lasts. I think it's phasing out at the end of this year, and then it's moving over to YouTube Music or something like that. So Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts is a great way to check that out. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. It really means the world to me. Lead with love and stay hydrated.